So, today we're going to dive into a pretty wild organization, one that operates right on the very edge of, well, of everything. They're not scientists, they're not priests, they're something else. They are the final witnesses to a universe that's dying. This is the Collegium of Structural Truths. The whole thing starts with this really unsettling idea. It's not about some big fiery apocalypse or an asteroid. No, it's something quieter and way more fundamental. What if the very fabric of truth itself could just fray, get weaker, and then eventually just stop being? And you know, the way it's described is just perfect. The Collegium is a cross between a coroner's office, a civil engineering firm, and a terminal care facility for the universe. Just think about that for a second. A coroner figures out how something died. An engineering firm looks for structural failure. And a hospice, well, a hospice is there to provide comfort at the very end. That's them. That's their job in the cosmos.
All right, so let's dig into their main job. See, this isn't about having some secret power or trying to change what happens. Nope, it's all about diagnosis. It's literally about performing an autopsy on reality.
So their whole mission is to go to places where existence is, for lack of a better word, sick. Places where the rules are breaking down, where what you and I call truth has just become wobbly. And here's the kicker. They don't try to fix it. They just record the decay. Almost like a doctor taking notes on the final symptoms of a patient they know they can't save.
And that brings us to their core principles, which, honestly, are pretty chilling. First up, strict non-intervention. They are hands-off. They believe that trying to fix a decaying reality just makes things worse. So this means they treat the death of the universe as a pure data-gathering opportunity. And every scrap of data, every piece of evidence they collect gets recorded in their massive archive, the Codex Prohibitum. Okay, so how does an organization that's basically watching the universe die even work? What's their formal, their intellectual framework for all of this?
Well, they actually have a name for what they do: pseudology. It's the formal academic study of documenting non-existence. I mean, think about that. It's a science built on observing the absence of things. It's the study of the cracks in the very foundation of everything we know.
And of course, every field needs its textbook. Theirs is called The Grimoire of the Vacancy. And no, this isn't some book of magic spells. It's a field manual, a diagnostic guide for their agents out in the field, teaching them how to spot the warning signs that reality is starting to come apart at the seams.
So who are the people that actually do this impossible kind of morbid work? Well, the Collegium has a really specific and thinning hierarchy. Let's take a look at the ranks of these recorders. At the very top, you've got the governing body, and they have this ominous name, the remaining editors. And yeah, that name is tragically literal. They oversee the surveyor physicians, whose whole job is to keep an eye on all the other members for signs of mental and physical rot. And then you have the surveyors. These are the frontline folks, the agents who actually go into these places called regions of ambient doubt, areas where the basic agreement of what's real has started to break down. And this chart really breaks down the roles and risks in a fascinating way. A surveyor's biggest risk is something called identity shear, and we'll get to that in just a second. But look at the risk for the surveyor physician. It's not direct danger from the void. It's the psychological horror of having to watch their own colleagues literally unravel and become conceptually impossible.
And here it is. Identity shear. This is the big one. This is the occupational hazard. When you spend too much time in a place where truth itself is failing, your own truth starts to fail. Your memories, your personal history, even the solid biological facts of your own body begin to fray and contradict themselves. You completely lose the thread of who you are. I mean, what does it even mean to be you when the proof of your own life is no longer valid? So you might be wondering, how in the world do you measure something that isn't there? How do you diagnose a void? Well, the Collegium has developed this bizarre and pretty fascinating set of tools and methods for their work. As you might guess, their instruments are totally conceptual. They have these resonance bridges that supposedly measure how much a location agrees with itself that it should even exist. They have concordance testing, which is this brutal series of checks to see if an agent's own story still makes sense. And then there are spatial disciplines, basically specific ways to move to avoid something they call void drift, which is the risk of being physically and conceptually just pulled into the nothingness you're studying. And this is what happens when it all goes wrong. This is the endpoint of identity shear. If an agent fails their concordance test, they're declared unresolvable. Their personal history can't be verified anymore. They're a living paradox, a person whose own past is no longer true. And even worse, they're now a potential unmouthed, basically a walking, talking doorway for the very non-existence they were sent to observe.
All right, let's step back a bit. We've talked about what they do and how they do it, but why? What kind of worldview do you have to just calmly document the end of everything? What's the core philosophy here?
Okay, this is absolutely central to how they see the universe. They believe that reality only exists because of a unanimous agreement. It's a consensus. So, to the Collegium, a lie isn't a moral problem. It's a structural incompatibility. It's a piece of information that just doesn't fit, and it puts stress on the whole system, kind of like a faulty beam in a skyscraper.
And this is where you can really see how different they are from their rivals, the void tongues. See, the void tongues look at these cracks in reality and see a source of power, something to be grabbed and manipulated. The Collegium, they see the void as a terminal infection. Their goal isn't mastery, it's diagnosis. They're doctors, not warlocks.
And there's this one quote that just, man, it sums up the whole tragedy of their mission. They know that as reality falls apart, their records of it will also become meaningless. Their archives will lose all context and eventually just stop existing. They aren't writing for future generations. They're just the final terminal witness to the very end.
And that brings us to right now, the present day. The records call this period the seventh unraveling, and the Collegium itself is definitely not immune to the decay it studies.
Just look at this number, 3 out of 7. While they were putting together the newest edition of their field manual, 3 of the 7 surveyors assigned to the project became unresolvable. They were lost, eaten by the very thing they were trying to write about. That's a nearly 50% casualty rate.
The rot is inside their own walls now. Their archives are physically failing. I mean, diagrams are literally vanishing from the pages of their books. They're finding field notes from agents who, according to their own files, never even existed in the first place. The autopsy is being performed on the coroners themselves. And this brings us to their final, desperate mission, to document something they call the sincere lie. We don't know exactly what it is, but it sounds like a paradox, a lie believed so strongly that it actually starts to rewrite reality, causing a structural break. They're terrified it has the potential to trigger a global failure cascade, a chain reaction that could unravel everything all at once.
And that's the question they leave us with, right? The ultimate paradox of their work. They're trying to find a pattern in the decay, to understand the logic of the collapse. But how can you possibly do that when the collapse is consuming the logic itself? How do you map a coastline as the ocean is washing the entire continent away? It is an impossible, heartbreaking, and absolutely fascinating task.